Good afternoon, and thank you for taking time away from your families and businesses to join us for this Epic Insight. This is Brian Lenz, Director of Sales here at Epic Retirement Plan Services. For today's webinar, we're switching things up a little bit, and I have the distinct pleasure of having a conversation with Ross Marino, founder of Transitus Wealth Partners and CEO of Advisor 2X. Via his own experiences, Ross has learned that the most impactful financial decisions are made in and around life events. Our objective for the conversation today will be to help you unravel the retirement planning puzzle and to share ways to speak with clients in a unique voice that empowers them to emerge as happier, more secure individuals. Ross is a fee-only CFP and certified financial transitionist. I'm sure he'll get into that a little bit during the conversation. He's been an advisor for over 30 years, and as I mentioned, is the founder of Transitus Wealth Partners. He does host 2 bi-weekly podcasts for advisors and has recently published his first book with co-author Susan Bradley called Shaping Change: How to Respond When Life Disrupts Your Retirement Plans. As always, your line will be muted, but today, if you have any questions you'd like us to stir into the mix, you can enter those along the way, and I will insert them into the conversation as it makes sense. So with that, we'll jump into the conversation. Ross, why don't you start by giving us a bit of background on yourself and how you arrived where you are today as far as your thought process is concerned.
Sure. Thanks, Brian. So I became a financial advisor when I was 21 years old, and I'll do this in a quick bullet point fashion. By age 26, realized I needed to offer more holistic financial planning and decided need to be a financial planner. My wife and I were in Florida, and we moved to North Carolina, where I planned on opening a financial planning practice. Within 30 days of landing in North Carolina, in Wilmington, North Carolina, I ended up injuring my back. And although I had these plans of building out an office and going out and networking and meeting prospects, because I didn't know anybody in Wilmington, I apparently wasn't smart enough to move to a town where I actually had relationships and connections. So kind of missed that part on the checklist, but moved there. And within 30 days, all of a sudden, all those plans are shot. And I can't get off the couch one day. And I spent the next 6 years laying on the floor on pillows in a room over my garage. And that's how I built my financial planning practice. Now, this was the late 1990s, so the internet wasn't really a thing. And it was borderline miraculous that I actually stayed in the business. Just random calls, random referrals, and I was able to stay in the business. Did that for a good period of time, eventually got a little better. My wife and I adopted a couple of girls, and just when life seemed stable and we had a plan of here's our family, here's what we're going to do, I started growing my practice and adding advisors. We find out our youngest has special needs. Didn't know that going in when we adopted her, didn't know what they were, weren't able to get a diagnosis until she was 13 years old. So we had a long stretch there of constant disruptions, going to the doctors. Will I need a special needs trust? Will she ever be independent? It really disrupts your long-term plans, and trying to think through all that is definitely a challenge. And during that same time, my wife fell ill and ended up being mostly bedridden for about 10 years. So I found myself in my 40s where I was trying to build out a practice and Advisor 2X, but I was basically a single parent for a special needs daughter and a part-time to full-time caregiver for my wife. And when you're a financial planner, we like to think long-term. When you're in that world, there really isn't any long-term. You're just responding to what's going on in life and trying to make decisions there. And during all of that, it just became clear that the hardest decisions you need to make often are the most important ones. Because when life disrupts, when your plans change and you're not really sure what's going to happen, you have to make decisions, but it's so challenging when you're in the middle of the disruption. And about 2015, in the middle of all this, I realized I need to shift my practice. We need to focus on helping people make decisions when life happens and plans change.
Yeah, well, I will ask you what not to do to your back another time, Ross, but more seriously, you've obviously overcome some very significant obstacles, challenges, however you want to refer to them along the way, but that seems to have created opportunity at the same time. Can you kind of chime in on how that influenced your practice and brought you here today and where you are today?
Just being in the middle of my own disruptions, it gave me a level of insight and then also empathy for people. When someone would come in and they were recently divorced or widowed or they lost their job, think about any major life event where your future is now in question or your future is completely different than whatever you expected. So when someone would come in for that, I would listen to them and I knew it was traumatic, but being a financial planner, you would still do some level of planning. And yes, it's nice to say, well, don't do anything for 12 months that's major, all these rules of thumb that, there's some value to that. But to actually understand that I would have conversations with people and they would tell me they're okay and they would nod their head and they would respond to me. What I didn't realize is that in many cases, they're not even going to remember that conversation, and I would ask questions or I would give recommendations that I thought may have been scaled down. It was still horribly insensitive and ignorant. I didn't realize the depth of trauma that many people go through. You can read about it, but until you go through something similar yourself, it's really hard to understand that you can have a conversation with someone and they're not going to have any recollection of it because of where they're at in life. So it really allowed me to just understand where people are at, slow things down, document a lot more, and really help people where they're at and try not to push too fast.
And in light of that, can you kind of describe your approach planning for clients, whether it be an individual wealth client or a participant in a retirement plan? And we'll get into kind of how you've integrated some of these concepts as well, but really just any highlights on the nuts and bolts of planning on your end?
Yeah, I can give you a quick nuts and bolts. So on our website, we'll have a link to the transitus process. And it's called the transitus process because the marketing people say you have to have your own process. So you got to call it something. So we got a name for it. It's just 4 questions. Many financial advisors would say, I'm pretty close on those 4 questions. That's what I do. We lead with these 4 questions, and here's why. When most people reach out to a financial advisor or a financial planner, when they actually initiate conversation, something's going on. It's life event driven. It's not, gee, I always thought I needed a financial plan, so maybe I should call somebody. Once in a while that may happen, but usually it's life event driven. So when somebody calls in, we have 4 questions that we're going to go over with them. They could be a planned participant who needs some personal advice, or it could be a private wealth client. Here's the 4 questions, and then I'll unpack them. One is, what's going on? That's the event. 2 is, how'd you get here? That's the backstory. We have to know what led up to that event. Number 3 and number 4, I ask together. So what are you thinking and how are you feeling? Now I'll unpack them quickly. The what's going on, that's just simply the event. Let's say, we'll give an example. Well, I'm going to be retiring at the end of next month. Instinctively, I may think, well, hey, congratulations, you're going to be retiring. But before I say that, I have to go to question 2. Well, what led up to this? And they may say, well, I'm being downsized. I really wanted to work for 5 more years. And I may have been the guy who said, oh, congratulations, you must have worked your whole life and you finally get to retire. Totally wrong. What's going on? How'd you get there? Got to know the backstory. Once I have some insight into the backstory and what's going on in their life, now I can ask the questions, what are you thinking and how are you feeling? And this is basically a brain dump for them. If I just ask, what are you thinking? They'll say things like, well, maybe I might cash in XYZ, or I was wondering about paying this off, or maybe I need to move or downside. It would be some type of financial decision. But when I say, what are you thinking and how are you feeling? 100% of the time, they will go in and tell me why they're thinking that. It's always going to be emotionally driven. Well, I'm concerned about this, or I'm afraid of that, and I don't know what my future is going to be, and I'm a little anxious. Once we know what they're thinking and how they're feeling, now we can be in a position to hopefully help them make the best decisions.
Thank you. And you mentioned a couple of examples where um, major change or life events are bringing people to you. Do you have any? Retirement was one you mentioned. Do you have any case studies or good highlights of that folks on the phone can be thinking of, and just to A, kind of prepare them better to respond to it, and B, maybe even use as a prospecting opportunity?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say instead of the type of event, let's look at a characteristic of the event. Whatever happened in the person's life, does it now bring their future into question? Or more importantly, whatever life event happened, are they now in that position where the way it was is not the way it will be? If something has irrevocably changed, that would be death or divorce, or you have to sell your business. If there's a change in life where the future is either uncertain or I have no idea because I can't even make a guess on it, when you have those types of situations, that's when you have to really slow down. Because when change happens, the instinct is, and this is from William Bridges' books and a lot of great work on transitions, the instinct is, what does it mean to me? And am I afraid? Am I losing something? Is there some risk that's there? So when change happens, people are fearful. So whatever the event is, ask yourself, is there a reason for this person to be fearful or anxious? If they are, if that's the type of change, then try to slow things down and know that it's hard to plan 5 years out when you're not sure what's going to be going on 5 days or 5 months from now.
Sure. So you're obviously very focused on marrying the human element of your practice with the financial or technical end of your practice. Is it safe to say that the human comes first? Where do you bridge into getting into the technical side? Is it after a couple meetings? Is it simply within an hour after the four questions? What kind of cues, if you will, do you look for when you actually say this person might now be receptive to the plan I'm going to set forth?
We're always going to start with the transitus investment process, and we're going to walk through that with a person. I had a call a couple weeks ago from someone who called in and they literally went through the entire four questions. They didn't even know what the questions were. But this lady is so self-aware and so deep in her thinking. She said, well, here's what's going on. And let me give you some backstory. Hope it's not too much. And I was thinking about this, but I got to tell you, here's how I feel. And I'm not like a slick salesman. So I just burst out laughing and said, you realize you're the first person ever to do our entire process with no prompting. Just what do you mean process? Like, it's on our website. Oh, I haven't been to your website, Ross. I'm like, that's awesome. So really smart lady. So the way I often present it is some advisors are investment first, but they got to be careful because they don't want to dive too much into investments. Other people may say, well, I'm planning first and then investment. I try to take the approach that I'm people first. And it's not to make it sound like a more in-depth or better way to go about it. It's just to check me and to remind me that I have to get to know the person and understand the person before I go anywhere near analysis and advice, because it really isn't technical or human or technical and human. I look at it as two sides of the coin. There's a front, there's a back. Neither is more important. They are connected. There is no purely financial decision. There's no purely emotional decision. The emotion is going to lead to some type of financial decision. They're always connected. But I have to understand that person as much as possible, find out where they're at, make sure that they know I understand them, because I did not just active listening, but deep listening, but I really got to their why and what's going on. Then I'm able to meld the two together. But we start with the person, but we always try to connect with the people. Here's the human side of this, what you're thinking, or here's the emotional, personal side of what you're thinking, what you're feeling.
Right. Well, makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned you're not a slick salesperson or slick marketer, but everyone on the phone is, or most are interested in growing their practices. Have you seen this approach just naturally build out your client base? Do your do your clients understand that this may be a little different than the average in the marketplace, and they're out trumpeting what you're doing to their network? Or how have you woven this into client attraction and retention?
Clients definitely notice the difference because we have the conversation. So I'll often get the comment from them that, you're like a psychologist, and I'll laugh and say, well, I use psychological principles, but trust me, I'm not like a psychologist. But we do use the principles. So they certainly notice. And once you walk through a major life transition with someone, they know that you're not your typical financial advisor or financial planner. They know that you're much more concerned about what their story is and understanding them and what they're thinking and how they're feeling. So once you do that, they know that. And certainly you have to articulate it. You have to remind people of that. But all of our referrals, and at least for my practice, we really haven't done any marketing for years. And I mean, literally years. Like maybe 10 years is the last time I actually did something that was marketing or some type of outreach other than the book that which just came out a couple of months ago. Everything's been referral based. Probably 90% of it, I'm making up a stat, but as far as I know, 90% or more is life event driven. Something happened, something was disrupted, and the clients say, or other centers of influence, why don't you give Ross a call? He understands life happens, plans change. So we repeat that mantra, we share it with people. That's where the referrals come in. And I think it's a sustainable differentiation.
Great. Thank you for that. You mentioned the book, and we referenced it when we kicked things off. What was the impetus for that, Ross? And can you give us kind of a highlight of what that covers?
The book is called Shaping Change. The co-author is Susan Bradley. She is the CEO and founder of the Financial Transitionist Institute. A brilliant lady, great work on helping people make decisions when life is stressful and when life happens. I knew I needed to write a book a few years ago and arranged to have the book written, but didn't start on it. I knew it would have to do something with making decisions. I'm a closet neuro geek. I love how the brain works. I listen more to podcasts and audiobooks about how people think and how they decide and finding your why, way more than the technical side. Probably need a lot more of the technical side, actually, but we're just talking to advisors here, so it's okay. We could throw that out there. But I love to know how people think. As soon as I started to gain experience with people and helping them make decisions when life happens, when it was traumatic, then I knew that's the book that I have to sit down with Susan and we have to write a book. And we took Shaping Change. It's not a textbook. We just thought about it and thought, the best way to communicate is telling stories. So it's a modern day parable of 4 different people over the course of about 5 years. And as you would guess, life happens and plans change for them. And this way we're able to help people relate. I've had clients call and say, man, you put me in the book, Ross. I'm like, okay, first of all, everybody's in the book, but you're right, you're on page 73. So, because there's certain quotes I would put in there from the characters. And wouldn't you know it, the clients actually picked that up and said, I've said that exact same thing to you. Like, you're not alone. A lot of people said it, but we wanted to do it relatable. But really, I just think that for the financial advisor community, and that's really who this book is targeted for, it's not really written for consumers, even though it's a story. We need to understand that it's great to have goals. It's great to do long-term planning, but that's not the bulk of what we do. If you're engaged with your clients, they're going to keep coming to you because life happened. And now all of a sudden their plans need to change. And that's why I thought we had to do a book about that.
Good stuff. Within that book, are you focusing more on how advisors can take a similar approach to their clients and highlighting stories as well as a framework? Are you kind of pointing out biases and kind of gotcha moments that people inherently stumble over? Like, a book in a similar vein, Predictably Irrational, comes to mind by Dan
Love it.
Ariely. That was one of my first introductions into a maybe similar tangential space, but kind of the premise there being, well, people don't behave rationally or don't behave in the context of an economic model, but you can actually predict when they will not and do things to counteract those irrational behaviors. Have you picked up any of those type of nuggets that you've seen repeatedly, and is that the kind of stuff you're sharing in the book, or is it more of an overarching here's how you deploy this concept in your practice,
Well, as an
or some of both.
advisor, yeah, I know what I like. And if I'm going to read a book, I want to hear the why behind what's going on, and I want to hear what to do. I want to read that. So we have a lot of nuggets in there straight out of the Certified Financial Transitionist curriculum. Many of them are quotes from people that are teachers within the program or documents, research studies that we use. So there is a lot of, they call them the call out boxes. So there is a lot of call out boxes that actually have, here's the psychology, here's the science behind this. And then in the back of the book after the story, we put in the protocols, some of the tools that we use as certified financial transitioners. The first one we put in there, and I'll just give you one example, it's called the decision free zone. It's a brilliant one pager. It basically breaks down whatever the client is thinking. So what are you thinking? How are you feeling? When they do that brain dump, you write everything down and then you prioritize it now, soon, or later. And when you go through a massive transition, the now items, they're usually maybe financial, legal, some tax items that you have to address. There's some tasks that needed to get done. Should I sell my house
Sure.
and move to Florida and buy a condo? That would be later. We can talk about that later. Definitely not now, definitely not soon. So with that decision-free zone, when you talk to people and say, what we're going to do is just do a brain dump, everything that's on your mind, and then we're going to help you prioritize. We'll look at what needs to be done now, what is important, and we'll get to it soon. It's just not urgent today. And then what we'll talk about later, which means maybe it'll be important down the road, maybe not. We don't have enough information maybe to make that decision, but you're able to prioritize it. That's the most common tool. Whenever somebody comes in and we pull out the DFC, decision free zone, they feel so much better because they got everything off of their chest. They see the list in front of them, and now they know, great, these are the 4 items I have to do right now. We'll circle back in 2 or 3 weeks. It's a pretty powerful protocol.
No, great stuff. And I know we're approaching on the half an hour here. I'll just remind everyone on the phone, if you do have any questions you want to throw out there, now's the time to do it. And Ross, while those come in, if someone really likes what you had to say today, it resonated with them, they think it could make a lot of sense within their practice, what's the first step? Where would you encourage an advisor to start making this a cornerstone of a practice, or even just a piece of a practice if it isn't the foundation?
I'd start with the book. Go to Amazon and buy Shaping Change. It's a quick read, so it's not War and Peace. I mean, I'm your typical type A DD advisor, so I promise you I cannot write a 400 page manual, but it's a quick read. Either it resonates with you or it doesn't. Someone like me, when I read this type of book, I just think, these are my people. This is what I do every day. This is life. This is what my people go through. So I love the story because it's straight out of my clientele, and anybody else who's a financial planner, it's going to be relatable to them. And then the protocols are in the back. And if you go through that, some of the protocols, if it resonates with you, go to financialtransitionist.com. That's the Institute's website, financialtransitionist.com. Check it out, sign up for some of the courses there. It's something that, I really think it grabs you or it doesn't. Some people love investments. That's okay. Some people love just the financial planning, the goals-based planning long term. That's okay. It's a big industry and you can specialize in many different things. But if you love to really, and I mean this, get your hands dirty when life happens and people are disrupted and they're scared and they don't know what's going to go on. If you're drawn to that, I love the messy prospects that call in. It's like, okay, let's figure this out. I've had 3-hour phone calls and meetings. It's not uncommon in our world. If you like that, then check out the Financial Transitionist Institute. It may be a great fit for you.
Great stuff. Appreciate that. Well, I don't see any more questions coming in from the audience, and I know you've got a soccer game to get to, so we'll conclude with that, Ross, unless you have any kind of final words of wisdom or nuggets you want to share with this group.
I'd say I'd just leave the closing is goals-based financial planning got us to this point. It's great for plan participants because we can show them some point in the future where they're going to retire, where they'll have financial freedom. That's fantastic. The 401k industry is built on that. Thinking towards the future, financial planning, goals-based planning. We also built on that, and I still start with goals-based planning. But if you want to be more relevant today, if you want a sustainable differentiation, learn how to help people when life happens and plans have to change. That's where people need the most amount of help. It's when they're scared, it's when they're overwhelmed, and the decisions they make during those life events, you get those right, you move the needle on net worth. You get those wrong, you also move the needle on net worth. They are the most impactful, the most important financial decisions anybody can make. So check it out if you're a financial planner, financial advisor. You can do a lot of good work in that area.
Well, great stuff, Ross. Thanks again to Ross Marino of Transitus Wealth and Advisor 2X. And thank you all, of course, for joining us for this Epic Insight webinar. We wish you safety and health as you support your families, colleagues, and your clients, of course. And please don't hesitate to contact us at Epic if there's anything we can do to support you. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Thanks,
Bye,
Ross.
everyone.